In this last review video, I'm just covering some common mistakes that I see students make. So the first common mistake that we're talking about is distributing an exponent. You can't distribute an exponent. So what an exponent is really telling you is that you have two factors of that same thing. So if I have x plus 3 quantity squared, that means I have two factors of x plus 3. When we multiply this out, we have to go through and look at term by term multiplication in order to get the correct answer. So x times x would give me x squared. If I look at x times 3, my outside terms, that would give me a 3x. My inside terms would also give me a positive 3x. And then my last terms would give me a positive 3 times 3, which would be 9. In this case, then we have some like terms that we can combine. So 3x plus 3x would give me 6x. So we have x squared plus 6x plus 9. So notice this is not just the same thing as x squared plus 9, looking at squaring x and squaring 3. We actually have to go through that multiplication in order to get the correct answer. If you don't, you're going to miss that middle term of 6x. Alright, the second most common mistake that I see is not distributing a negative sign. So in this example, we're also going to look at the difference quotient and kind of remember what that really means. So if I'm looking at the difference quotient, that's looking at f of x plus h minus f of x all over h. So in this case, our function is equal to 1 over x. So if we plug that in and evaluate our difference quotient, kind of remember where your variable shows up. So my variable is showing up in the denominator. So when I'm now evaluating f of x plus h, that's going to be 1 over x plus h. Then if I subtract off f of x, that's just 1 over x. Then this is all over h. So if we kind of think about those pieces, my f of x plus h is this first little piece. My f of x is the second little piece. And then h is just still h in the denominator. Alright, so if we're looking at the top, here we are subtracting fractions. In order to subtract fractions, you first need a common denominator. So if I'm finding my common denominator here, well, x plus h times x would be my least common denominator. So that means I need to multiply my first fraction by x over x in order to get x plus h times x. And I would need to multiply my second fraction by x plus h over x plus h to get my least common denominator of x times x plus h. Alright, so then we're still dividing this entire thing by h. So if we continue down here and go through that multiplication, in the top I just have 1 times x, which is x. As I'm looking at this, again, kind of notice this negative sign. This is what is really easy to forget to distribute. So I really have negative 1 times x plus h. I'm going to go ahead and just write that as negative x plus h and put those parentheses there to remind me to distribute that negative sign to both of those terms. So when I do that, I have x minus h over my common denominator of x times x plus h. And again, this is still all over h. When we distribute that negative sign, then we see we have a positive x, we're subtracting x, those would cancel each other out to leave me with negative h all over x times x plus h. And then we're dividing by h. Well, h is the same thing as h over 1. If we're dividing by h, remember that's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So if I multiply then by 1 over h, here we can see we have a factor of h in the top and the bottom. Those would cancel each other out. So simplifying this, I would have a negative 1 over x times x plus h when we evaluate our difference quotient. Again, here we looked at a lot of different things in this same problem. We found a common denominator. We also remembered to distribute this negative sign, and then we looked at dividing is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. Alright, the last common mistake that we're looking at here is to cancel common terms. So you can only cancel common factors when you're looking at reducing a rational. So factors, remember, are the pieces that you are multiplying. So if you want to look at common factors, the first thing that you have to do is factor. So if I'm simplifying this rational here, again, before I start canceling things, I need to factor. So if we factor the top, we're looking for two numbers that would multiply to give me a -3, but add together to give me a -2. So that would be x minus 3 and x plus 1. And in the denominator, if I have x squared minus 9, I know that's the difference of two squares. So x squared is x squared, and 9 is 3 squared. So I know that would factor to give me x minus 3, x plus 3, right? The same pieces, but one positive and one negative. When we factor, then we can see our common factors. In this case, our common factors are x minus 3. We can cancel those common factors to simplify or reduce this down to x plus 1 over x plus 3.